This podcast is produced by the Harwood Productions Podcast Network. To learn more about the network and to find more of our shows, visit us online at www.harwoodpodcast.com.
I'm Cindy Harris, and in this episode, I'm taking the classic Linzer Torte that's famous in Europe and turning it into a delicious little muffin. This muffin is layered with raspberry jam, ground almonds, and it's got a great hint of cinnamon and lemon zest in it. I'm going to start by getting my 12-cup muffin pan, and I'm going to line it with some of these paper liners. These liners really help make cleanup super easy. Now, part of Linzer is not only raspberry, but almonds. So for the almond part, I'm going to be grinding up some blanched almonds. Now these almonds have been blanched, which means that the skins have been removed. Now if you can't find them, it's not a big deal. Whether they're sliced or whole, just get your hands on any kind of almonds that you can. Now I want to end up with 3/4 of a cup of ground almonds. So I'm going to use my little mini prep food processor here. Now if you don't have one of those available to you, what I'd suggest is you just get your knife out and on a chopping board, just start chopping them as finely as you can. Now, if you are lucky enough to have a little mini prep or a food processor, what we're going to do is we're just going to pulse these to grind them up. So you see, I'm not letting it run. I'm just pulsing it. If I were to let it run all the way through, there's a chance it could turn into butter, like peanut butter. I could turn this into almond butter. So you do have to be kind of careful that you not let it run too much. So I find that if you just pulse it like this, you never run into too much trouble. Now you can see these are not a powder, but they are ground up pretty finely. So you could get to this stage by using a knife. You just have to kind of work at it a little bit. But this is the consistency we're looking for. That measures out to be about 3/4 of a cup of ground almonds. The reason we need 3/4 is we're going to be putting 1 tablespoon in each of the muffin wells, so that comes out to exactly 3/4 of a cup. Now these muffins can be made all in one big bowl. So we're first going to start by getting our flour measured out. Now I'm using all-purpose flour, and I've stirred the flour around with my knife to kind of aerate it, get some air in, and then I'm going to dip and level the flour out, just like this. And I want to measure out 2 cups of flour. Now for our lift, I'm going to measure out 1 tablespoon of baking powder. Then I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now traditional Linzer Torte also has a little bit of cinnamon, so I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of that. And for some sweetness, 2/3 of a cup of sugar. Now I want to mix these ingredients together, so I'm just going to take my spatula. And what I'm looking for is to make sure that the leavening and the cinnamon is mixed all through the flour and the sugar. Now for our wet ingredients, I'm going to measure out 1 cup of milk, but I'm not going to put that in the dry ingredients quite yet. Now to the milk, I'm going to add 1 egg. And the reason I didn't put the milk in first is because I want to use a fork and kind of break that egg up just a little. And another ingredient that's found in Linzer Torte is some lemon zest. So I'm going to take just a regular medium-sized lemon, take the zest off of it with my microplaner. Now, I got an email from Anna who lives in Portugal, and she was saying that it's difficult to find a microplaner where she is. And so what I suggested to her is that she find the smallest grater that she could find, and then take the zest off the lemon, and then use a knife and chop it up as finely as she can get it, and that would work out great. So I'm going to take this lemon zest and I'm going to pop that in with my egg and my milk. And the reason I do that is because if I were to put the lemon zest in with my dry ingredients, I find the zest kind of clumps together. And I really want that lemon to go all throughout the batter. So if I mix it up in the liquid ingredients, that's exactly what it will do. So I'm going to take my dry ingredients, put that in with my flour. Just kind of toss that flour around just for a little bit, not totally mixing it in. Now you can see I've just barely tossed this together because my last ingredient is going to be 1/3 cup of butter that I have melted. And I usually do that first because I like the butter to cool just a little bit. Now I'm going to take my spatula and mix all those ingredients together. Make sure you get all the pockets of flour. Every now and then I always find one at the very bottom. So I want to make sure I get my spatula really coating the bottom and the sides, and that looks pretty good. So I think we're ready to start making our muffins. Now when we put these muffins together, there's actually going to be some layers to it. So I'm going to start by putting my ground almonds in a little bowl. I find it makes it a little bit easier to scoop them out. And then of course you can't have anything Linzer without raspberry jam. Now this is actually some fresh raspberry freezer jam that I made over the summer with fresh raspberries that I got from the farmer's market. This is my favorite for flavoring. I find that jars of raspberry jam, they taste fine, but there's nothing like fresh. So maybe think about that sometime. It lasts in the freezer all year, so I just put this in the refrigerator last night to defrost. It looks so good. Now it's time to start putting our muffins together. I'm using my cookie scoop, and I want to fill the muffin cups about halfway full with the batter. Now at this point I do want to make sure that I have a nice even layer of batter, so sometimes I take my scoop and I kind of move the batter around just to make sure it's totally covering the bottom of the muffin tin, and that looks good. Now I'm going to get a tablespoon and my raspberry jam, and I'm going to put 1 tablespoon of raspberry jam on the top of each one. Isn't that jam the most beautiful red color? Now I'm going to take my almonds and I'm going to put a tablespoon of ground almonds on top of the jam. Now I'm going to cover the almonds up with the rest of the batter. Now you'll want to divide the batter up evenly. So just be kind of conservative on your first go around. You can always add more. Now it's really important that you have your oven already preheated to 400 degrees. You don't want to put the muffins in a cold oven, they won't bake correctly. And then the other thing I do is whenever I have muffins that have jam in them, I always put the muffin pan in a rimmed baking sheet. Sometimes the jam can bubble up a little bit and you don't want that spilling over into your oven. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all, but this is a nice safety net for that. So these are going to go into the oven and they're going to bake for 18 minutes. So here are our Linzer muffins. Now as it turns out, the jam did sort of leak out a little bit, but not so much that it came out onto the baking sheet. So I'm glad I had that under there anyway. Now I'm going to take my toothpick and poke it in. And sure enough, these are baked all the way through. I'm going to let these sit in the pan for about 5 minutes. I'm going to take the muffins out of the pan, but I have a little paring knife that I'm going to use. When the jam bubbles over, it can sometimes fuse to the side of the pan. So I take a little paring knife and I just kind of run it along there. It makes it easier to get them out of the pan. And then I just use a fork and I lift them out of the pan and I set them on the cooling rack. These need to cool for a few minutes. That jam is smoking hot and you wouldn't want to bite into that. So I let these sit for about another 15 or 20 minutes on the cooling rack. That way they'll be nice and cool enough to bite into. Well, if you'd like to give these Linzer muffins a try, just go to our website and visit the Nothin But Muffin show notes, and I'll have the recipe there for you. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. I'll see you next time.